Trebje se demonstrira.
Agresija je završena.
Nemojte da mislite da nećete odvesti pošačen
Gospodin Karadžić više niko neće više niko možda ostaviti.
Republika Hrvatska proglašuje samostalnom i suverenom državom.
Türkiye'den daha büyüktür. Ufkumuzu 782 bin kilometre kareyle sınırlandıramayız.
Hello, dear listeners. This is Jakub Horvat from the Balkan Chronicles podcast, and I'm happy that you are here with us as our audience. And I'm introducing you. Well, you know him already. A lot of you love him already. It's Filip Ilankovic, our guest expert on all things Serbian, political, economical. And today we are doing yet another episode, you guessed it, on Serbia. Please, Filip, introduce yourself again for those who have not heard our previous episodes, and what will you be talking about today?
Thank you, Jakob, for your warm welcome once again. I'm glad to be here to talk with you once again on topics related to the Serbian issues. Well, I'm a research fellow at Hungarian Institute of International Affairs located in Budapest, but I was born in Serbia, so I'm basically half Serbian, half Hungarian, so I can be named a local of Serbia, and that's why I'm so interested in this region and especially in this country. Today we will discuss EU and Serbia relationship, how complicated it is, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but we are going to come to a conclusion where this EU pathway of Serbia is headed to, where it is going.
So we will be talking mostly about European integration of Serbia. It's a long story. It's not as long as some of the other countries in Western Balkans region, because, well, we can explain a bit or extrapolate a bit, because, well, EU integration, we all know it as you part Hungarian, me as Slovak. This is an ongoing process where the European Union, like core countries, the 6 core countries from 1950s, from the European Economic Union expanded in 1993. It changed into European Union, and again there was this enlargement process, which was very much influenced by the collapse of the Soviet Union. And this was a fantastic opportunity for the Europe to, well, make a political union on its own. So the process started. There was the big enlargement in 2004, and the Balkan countries were obviously the ones who would be next. Well, it at least appeared so, but the only country which actually joined the European Union was Croatia in 2013. Montenegro was for a long time the front runner. It was thought that they would be within the European Union like in 2020 on those scales, and other countries would quickly follow. Well, that was obviously not the case. But going back to the grassroots, how does the European enlargement go? First, there is the Stabilization and Association Agreement. Once that is signed, the country's progress and its reforms are being reviewed, and it is judged how country is structurally well set to be the future part of the European Union. Then they reach candidate status. Once they are candidate, they are eligible for some European funding. Then once the review process is being finished, then is a big moment, and the negotiating framework is agreed upon. There is an intergovernmental conference between future member state and the European Union, and these are what we know very well are the chapters, which are not de facto chapters anymore. They are organized under 6 clusters, and these clusters are being reviewed as a whole. Well, and once that is finished, the country is set to be full member, and with not full rights at first. They don't have veto power at first. It will be granted at later, but what is very important, they have access to full European funding, etc. Well, where are the various countries at? I can answer that question, which I asked myself. For Serbia, its negotiations are already open. They have not opened all clusters, just 2, I believe.
They have 22 chapters open because it was done under previous methodology which came before 2020, and I will discuss that because these were basically the golden ages of Serbian integration. So they have 22 chapters open, 2 provisionally closed, and they still need to open. So there are 35 in total in case of Serbia, because 35th is a special one. It concerns the issue with Kosovo. Yeah, they still have a long way to go.
Yes, Montenegro, they have opened all of the clusters and chapters, and they are probably the closest ones to the finishing line. They state that by 2027 they want to be a full member, which is very optimistic to say at best. Then there is North Macedonia, which provisionally opened its negotiations. It's not going well at all because they first have to amend their constitution to accept Bulgarians as a minority, which is a non-go for current governments. Then Albania is fast-tracking its process. They have opened the negotiations. They have a lot of chapters opened also last year. All of them, yes, indeed, all of them are opened. And Bosnia,
none of them closed.
Yes, none of them closed. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a kind of in the middle ground. It is a candidate country, but it also provisionally opened its negotiations under many conditions. Bosnia is a special case, special to my heart, and personally I don't see it happening very soon, unfortunately. Well, Kosovo, I think it applied for European membership.
Yes, but it wasn't granted a candidate status.
Yes.
Well, with Kosovo there are many issues because even 5 European Union member states don't accept its statehood. So it would be very difficult to see Kosovo progress if something drastically doesn't change, which I'm convinced it won't.
And let's not forget Turkey. It's not part of the Balkans, but culturally, historically, it's part, and it has applied in 1950s. Actually, and it has opened negotiations in 2005, and its application is currently frozen, not being processed. We can say for various reasons, mostly discussed on the grounds that because of human rights, etc. But technically speaking, it has to do with Copenhagen criteria, which were established in 1993, and Turkey adopted a new constitution in 2017, and this constitution is incompatible with the basic criteria because such a combination of power is held by the Turkish presidency over appointment of ministers of justice, etc., that there is basically very little separation of powers, and it's incompatible with EU rules. And personally, I don't see Turks amending their new constitution again for the sake of European Union, and European Union obviously is not going to amend its basic law for the Turks. So that's the overview of how situation was, because it suddenly changed in 2022 when the war in Ukraine broke out, and suddenly Ukraine was fast-tracked to be applicant, then to be a candidate, and now upon negotiations. The same with Moldova and Georgia. Georgian application is not being processed currently, but Ukrainian and Moldovan one is, and there is discussion that maybe they will join the EU even before Serbia. So let's have it at that as basics for our discussion, and I would say this is about Serbia. This is why we met. So please take it away.
Thank you. Just want to compliment you on some parts that you mentioned, just to give my brief opinions. So regarding Turkey, yes, obviously there are many issues regarding maybe constitutional, technical issues, and so on, political issues. But just imagine there are many other issues that are very rarely taken into consideration. If you accept Turkey being an EU member state, then the Turkey would have an enormous power within the EU as an organization, and then some major powers within the EU, like Germany or France or Italy, will lose their influence significantly. So it's a no-no for everybody, I think, to accept Turkey as a member state. I would say that similar situation can be applied to Ukraine as well, because Ukraine is also a massive country with more than 30 million people living there. I'm not sure currently how much, but according to the last census is more than 30 million, and it would be very difficult politically to maintain the European Union as an organization in this current form if these countries are accepted. On the other hand, Ukraine, due to, as you said, in 2022, the full-scale invasion or war or whatever it is called, depending on the narrative and political beliefs, had broke out, and that creates a series of issues. But it also created an opportunity for enlargement. At least this is what people in the European Union, not only in Brussels as technocrats, but also in the member states' governments, leaders of the countries, have been talking about. So there is a momentum, and de facto there is, because Ukraine is considered as a frontier of Europe right now. And the European Union has their own goals regarding Russian Federation. Basically, they have huge antagonism towards Russia, and Ukraine is just one of the tools where EU thinks it can somehow weaken Russia's place globally and also regionally, which is much more important for the European Union, because let's not forget there are Baltic countries which are they share the common border with Russian Federation, and it's very risky to have European Union members. There is also Finland, which became part of NATO as well, to receive some security guarantees. So this kind of situation that happened in Ukraine won't happen again. That's the different thing, if we agree on that, if it will happen or not, but there is a risk. So the European Union officials, they saw the risk in this, and somehow they want to compensate Ukraine. So one of the main things the European Union can do is to utilize their most effective weapon, I would say, in their foreign policy, which is enlargement policy. So if they use this enlargement policy to reward Ukraine, and this is the logic of most of the European leaders that I'm following right now. So if they admit Ukraine to the European Union, then Ukraine will get some security guarantees. Then the European Union will become bigger, more important geopolitical player, etc., etc. But I see something that is called strategic blindness here, because there is a different region. So it's not Eastern Partnership or Eastern part of the Europe where we have a war, but there is a different region which is also pretty unstable, and you mentioned several countries. As a matter of fact, most of them are quite unstable, because last time there was a war on the European soil was 30 years ago, and it was exactly in this region. And European Union has this short-sighted approach to react only on these geopolitical circumstances that are right now, for example, with Ukraine. But if you think more long term, then including the Western Balkan countries into the European Union sphere of influence, right now it is, because it's economically very much tied with the European Union, the whole of the region. But if you integrate it even more, then you lower the risk of possible conflict breaking out, because you integrate these countries in one, you show the people of these countries what benefit can European Union offer, and then by doing this you not only create a safe region possibly, but you also create a prosperous region, which is, if you talk with Balkan guy like that you will make his country prosperous, it's quite unbelievable. But I firmly believe that it can happen with the European Union membership. And unfortunately, some of candidate countries, they decided not to use this momentum, which was many times mentioned by the European Union leaders and the technocrats. So some countries that did manage to utilize this momentum were definitely Albania and Montenegro. They used this in best possible opportunity. But if you just only observe Albania, so they opened all of the negotiation chapters in only 2 years' time.
Yes.
1.5 years' time. So during the Hungarian presidency of the Council in 2024, basically the Albania opened their first clusters. But now they open all of them. So that shows the political will and desire for the European Union and political trajectory, which will be very much important in this podcast, because I will pay much attention to it, because Albania is the country that was basically stuck in the EU negotiations, and everybody who deals with the Balkans knows that, well, if you objectively speaking look at all of the countries, maybe they don't belong in the European Union if you observe like all of the parameters. But if you are being perfectionist, then some other EU member states wouldn't belong into the European Union, but they do. So if the Brussels and the European Union as a whole would utilize this moment to maybe offer some benefits to the Western Balkan countries, and Serbia especially, because we will deal with it today, then this trend of misbelief, short-sightedness and everything could be reversed. What do I mean by that? So you excellently described the EU enlargement process and integration process throughout the decades, but going also far back in 2003 on Thessaloniki summit, where all of the Western Balkans countries committed to the European Union path. Only one of them joined. You mentioned Croatia in 2013, but what about the rest of them? Why aren't they a member states already as Croatia is? Well, there are some theories. So for example, Croatia was a very good, obedient NATO member. It has excellent geostrategic locations, so it covers huge part of Adriatic Sea. Also, their political trajectory was very much focused on the European Union. And what happened? They became a member state because geostrategically speaking, it was good back then. But what about now? You have basically this island of countries that do not belong to the European Union, nor de facto nor de jure, but they belong into their economic zones. So only final step to integrate this country is necessary. And this story began, as I said, in 2003, but then Serbia was only granted a candidate status in 2012, so a lot of years have passed. So basically they waited 9 years for a candidate status because of the many different political internal reasons. I'm not going to go deeply into that, but what I will mention is that very early on, president of Serbia, that time it was Serbia and Montenegro, Vojislav Koštunica, he realized that Serbia will need to make a lot of concessions in this European Union path. So if Serbia wants to become the European Union member state one day, it needs to give up a lot. What do I mean by that? At that time, the main issue was basically extraditing the war criminals, or even the former president Slobodan Milošević, who was considered as a war criminal. And because of this, there were divisions internal Serbian political landscape. So you have a president on one side which is nationalistic oriented, Koštunica, and he thinks that if the Milošević is a war criminal, he should be tried in Serbia. But then you have Zoran Đinđić, who is more pro-EU oriented, and he realizes that Serbia, at that time Serbia and Montenegro, they need to extradite him to gain some points with the European Union at that time. And if Serbia doesn't do that, then it will be isolated in this international arena, how to say it.
And then the PM was assassinated.
And the PM was assassinated exactly in 2003. But nevertheless, Thessaloniki summit took place just, I don't know, several weeks after that, or I'm just guessing, but it took place after the assassination. And still, the willingness of Serbia was shown that it's not only about one man's dream or something like that, but it's strategic direction of the whole country. And because of these issues and disagreements, should we cooperate with International Criminal Tribunal in Hague or not? The negotiation process and signing of this stabilization and association agreement, which you said, was delayed till several years. So just going briefly to the timeline, there have been many setbacks. Politicians realized that Serbia will need to make some concessions. Some of politicians accepted that, but these concessions just started making no sense in one point. And these kind of pro-European policies at one time became a massive burden. So in 2008, Kosovo proclaimed independence, self-proclaimed, from Serbia, and this was a huge blow because, first of all, okay, US accepted it as independent country, but then you have majority of the EU countries that like in the same time just accepted that.
Not Slovakia.
Not Slovakia, of course. As the Serbian president said, Slovakia is a brotherly nation, and we also have very good relationship politically with Slovakia. So
yes, and always will be. Our president recently visited Serbia with all the honors, and the great Slavic Brotherhood is still there.
Yes, that's nice to hear in these tricky times we live in, especially in Europe. But just coming back to the story that many EU countries accepted Kosovo as independent state, and this was a huge blow. So on the one side, you have Serbia, which has its own national interest, which has a territory which is being basically taken away and accepted by the same organization that it aims to become a member of. So this was this dilemma, but still, since then, European Union remains the main strategic direction of Serbia. Why am I talking all of this? Because since 2003, many things happened, many things have changed, and the issue with chasing the EU membership is that it has become a moving target. So when this process began a lot of years ago, basically the negotiation started in 2013, it was a completely different story than it is now. What do I mean by that? Enlargement is going into these cycles, if I may explain it that way. So we have a cycles where the geostrategic importance is of utmost importance. So if you have Romania and Bulgaria in 2004, which are basically not ready to become an EU member states, but they were promised membership, so basically they were part of this package of this big boom enlargement. It was 2004, but they got their membership in 2007 because then they were considered as ready, but everybody in their right mind wouldn't say these countries were ready. Even back then, maybe to some extent even now. But they had an excellent geostrategic location, and due to geopolitical reasons, they got admitted. Then you have a period where also Croatia was admitted exactly because of these things. So if you observe Croatian economy back then, was it suitable? Would Croatia fulfill all of the negotiation clusters and chapters, I don't know, whatever that we have today? I doubt it. So
Yes,
the country must be perfect to achieve these kind of things. But then after the Croatia, we have an issue that is called enlargement fatigue. So basically what it means is that the countries of the European Union and the European Commission and the bodies of the European Union institutions were tired of accepting new members. And as a consequence of this, we had Jean-Claude Juncker, president of the European Commission, stating in 2015 that no further enlargement will take place in the next 5 years while his commission is in place. So what kind of message does this statement send to all of the candidate countries? So, okay, we will continue talking with you on various issues. You need to continue with your reforms. That's good for you, but definitely you will not become member in the next 5 years. Because we have accepted many countries, basically 13 countries since 2004, and that has created a lot of issues within an organization as itself. And then when we got to 2020 and this period of non-enlargement, as Jean-Claude Juncker promised, ended, then COVID began. And then new challenges emerged like COVID, like inflation crisis, energy crisis, Russian-Ukrainian war, and so on and so on. And we got to the situation where Serbia basically opened their last chapters, clusters, whatever, in 2021. So in December 2021, you had the last official progress of Serbia in their EU integration path. So right now we are in February already, 2026, and nothing has changed. So what kind of message does this send?
Yes, I would say a very poor one. I have never been a very strong proponent of European Union not being open to new member states. The issue what you're discussing is basically merit-based process. Well, should it be merit-based or politically based? Well, I was at the ministry in 2022, and I remember that there was really a rush. I mean, suddenly everyone remembered that we have this European enlargement, which we have ignored for some time, and now there is a war going on, and I mean, we really need to take care of our own continent. I mean, we have to show these countries that they are part of us. So let's do something. The French were at the helm of the presidency back then, so a very strong country, but France was always opposed to enlargement. or quick enlargement, but they really wanted to do something with it, and suddenly they found themselves in a position that European Union is not the same European Union as it was before, because at that time only Western Balkans countries were involved in integration process. Now we have also Ukraine, we have Moldova, Georgia, Turkey, just theoretically, but at that time there was only Western Balkans. Okay, they wanted to start this process, but suddenly there was a pushback from even member states, because the bilateral issues started to be a case, as in Bulgaria v North Macedonia, and suddenly when North Macedonia has issue with Bulgaria, but its enlargement was coupled with Albania, because there was a debate, very bureaucratic one, that since they started the process at the same time, they are almost at the same level, so they will couple the process. But this was nonsense. It turned out in the end, and now Albania is progressing very fast while North Macedonia is not. And now there was issue of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then it's an unstable country by design, since it's a country which is not governing itself. So what do we do with it? So let's give it candidate status as soon as possible. Okay, it was awarded, but the country is even worse than it was before. It had no stabilization effort. So even the process itself is not as strong as it was before. So the world has changed, and even I would say that European Union doesn't know what to do with its tool. It knows how to use it in regards to Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine, as you said, is being rewarded for being the frontier, the front line of Europe. And it is rewarded with this promise of being part of strong European community and monetary benefits, etc. But what do you offer to the countries of the Western Balkans, which already have a visa-free regime? They are economically integrated very well. There are free trade agreements. Majority of them are already in NATO or have some cooperation with NATO. There are police agreements regarding border control, migration. There is ongoing discussion regarding cancellation of roaming fees. So just they're as interconnected as they can be without being part of political union.
Yes, definitely, but many things still lack here, basically. What do I mean by that? You said that European Union utilized very well the enlargement policy with the Ukraine, yes. But the question which arises here is that how good is this in the long term? What would be the consequences of it? So me personally, I'm against this fast-tracked approach and more for this merit-based approach. So I'm totally against this idea that now we should admit as soon as possible Ukraine and Moldova just because they got into this unfortunate situation. And by the way, Moldova is not in a fortunate situation since 2022, but much before that. So they're a very underdeveloped country and very much focused on basically maintaining their statehood. So if you accept this kind of country, then you basically import another Cyprus issue into your organization, which makes no sense. And in the same time, which is hypocritical, you are making Serbia and Kosovo to reconcile and to accept each other. I mean, Kosovo would accept Serbia without any issues, but to ask Serbia, not to ask, but to force Serbia to accept former part of its territory going independent, and that makes very little sense if you think it that way. But I was talking about these cycles of geopolitical importance and merit-based system. So basically, this cycle ended with Croatia joining the European Union. And then, since 2013 to 2021, where we had a negotiation between Serbia, in this case, and the European Union, I would say this was the golden age of Serbia's EU accession path, because it was very much focused on these merits that were asked from Serbia to implement. So the reforms, the economical output, basically almost everything except right now, which is in the focus, like common foreign and security policy, which is like a top priority all of a sudden, but it wasn't before. So if we observed these reforms, we could see that Serbia has progressed a lot in these 7 years, let's say. It was a golden age. But then this cycle interrupts with bigger either global, either regional issues like COVID or Ukraine-Russian war, it just starts to be reversed. And then all of a sudden you have completely different expectations of one organization towards their candidate countries. This is nothing else than a moving target. It's acceptable if you combine these two, but at least be consistent. I'm arguing and I'm claiming that with these moves, EU enlargement policy loses its credibility. Not only in the long term, but it already lost its credibility. If you talk with people in Serbia, for example, about the EU, wave their hand and say, oh, it's a done deal. I mean, nobody cares about it. We will never become a member state. Why not? Because these promises that European Union is offering, like you will become members of common market, people can move freely, democracy and so on. These are not achievable in these countries. Why? Because the people in Serbia, especially in Serbia, because Serbia has the worst public opinion among all of the candidate countries about the European Union, these people are basically sick of it. And it's not only because it lasts more than 2 decades, it's because this complete inconsistency which we see that the European Union moves this further and further away, this target of the EU membership. And even if there is some new methodology again, a new approach to this enlargement issue, even if the European Union would offer this, layered multi-speed Europe, where we have a center and then we have a periphery and then we have candidate countries which are in some way member states of the European Union, but not, of course, fully fledged, I think this would be a very good idea to start with, to integrate these countries even faster. Because right now, some countries like Serbia and North Macedonia will not move from this standpoint where they are at all.
Yes, I believe that approval rate among Serbian population for EU accession is about 36%.
Yeah, it varies based on the source, but yeah, it's around 1/3 of population. And basically the question, if tomorrow would be a referendum to vote if Serbia should become an EU member state, would you vote yes or no? So basically only 1/3 of citizens would say yes, which is a devastating data. So even in North Macedonia, which is also in a very difficult situation, where their negotiations basically failed because on the one hand you have Greece blackmailing them because of their names, then they change their constitution, their name, then it's finished. They think they can start negotiating properly, and then you have another member state, Bulgaria, blocking them due to some different reason, and it's bilateral issue. It doesn't concern the Brussels or the European Union as an organization why this is happening. So even this country has more than 2/3 of people that are still hoping for the EU membership, still after 2 decades, which is quite fascinating. My brain cannot comprehend this. I cannot understand why this is happening. I can understand, for example, in the case of Montenegro or in case of Albania, because they have been provided with strong incentive to continue their negotiations. But in case of Serbia, just to say, the last progress was in December 2021. But since then, European Commission every year provides that Cluster 3, for example, should be opened fully with Serbia, because there are some chapters that are still not open in this cluster. And this would be just a little political signal to Serbia, okay, you are still in the game, still in negotiations, we can start negotiating. But then you have some countries in the council blocking this decision, even though European Commission says that every year in their reports on Serbia. This is a very bad. Some countries that are blocking this are blocking, well, of course, because of the rule of law issues and many other also, for example, not aligning with common foreign and security policies regarding imposing sanctions on Russian Federation. But some countries, for example, like Bulgaria, which is voting against opening of this cluster, has the bilateral issues with Serbia because Serbia-North Macedonian relationship is getting stronger and stronger. And then you have again the case where EU member states blocks progress in the negotiations politically because some bilateral disputes. It's really bad for the entire process. It's bad for the enlargement policy. It's bad for the Western Balkan countries. So my proposal to somehow find a solution for this complex issue would be just provide something, give something to this country of Serbia, so they can give it back in some way. So the latest information, just several weeks ago, new body was formed, the operational body in Serbia, composing out of some ministers and the Serbian ambassador in EU. They are basically helping the negotiation process with their expertise, with their political will, and forming such a task group sends a signal to the Brussels that, okay, Serbia is still strategically, their strategic way is pointed towards the European Union. We're still walking there. Right now it's crawling or not even crawling, but still we wish to walk. So in return, at least this chapter 3 could be open, and that would be positive signal for the entire enlargement process.
I would love that idea. The issue is very often, unfortunately, very personal one. I mean, President Vučić is who he is. He can be very outspoken, and also his ministers, they are not very candid about the European Union and its representatives, and these representatives can take it very personally. They also have sometimes big egos on them, and this reflects, I mean, this is the state where we are now. At least it's my understanding, it has gotten much more personal. And to quote one of the Slovak current ambassadors, there is no point in EU enlargement in Balkans without Serbia. If you don't have the biggest country, the economically largest, there is very little point. I mean, you need to have Serbia as part of the EU, and I can only agree with that. And I wouldn't say it's Vučić's fault or his ego. I mean, as you said, look at the population. There is very little support from the ground, and why would Serbian president do something which his population does not support? There needs to be a consensus in that, and there needs to be an incentive from the outside, from the EU. I mean,
definitely. But just to mention several things to clarify for the listeners or viewers, not to think that I'm just talking against the European Union. There have been many mistakes on both sides. Definitely. And especially in the last couple of years, the negative narrative towards the European Union from the highest Serbian officials, it's very much present in everyday domestic discourse. I'm just saying that this is a result and the outcome of failing enlargement policy in previous decades from the European Union side. So you always need, for tango, you need two. And in this tango, well, both dancers, if I may put it in that perspective, they dance like their legs are broken, basically. And I would say that both sides are to blame, but the European Union, as an initiator of everything, has to somehow realize that they need to take this blame. And I was at one conference in Belgrade several months ago, and I remember listening to the European Union ambassador in Belgrade talking about this complex relationship. And for the first time in my life, I heard that they are also aware of their own actions or inactions, which is a very diplomatic way to say we screwed up, as European Union did screw up first with Juncker's statement, then later with neglecting the region because of the other issues, because region is still here. COVID came and disappeared. But if we just look back to that period of COVID, like the European Union, I remember reading it from the headlines, basically donated, 20-something vehicles like in 2021, like on the end of 2021. But in the very beginning of that same year, you had millions of vaccines coming from China and several hundred thousands coming from Russia. So what signals does this send, basically? It sends that, okay, if the European Union is not, competent enough to solve our issues, we will turn towards other actors. And this is exactly the case what's happening in Serbia. If you look at, for example, imports, exports, you can see that, okay, European Union and especially Germany has the huge percentage, has the huge share. It's still the main trading partner, but this percentage is shrinking. And the other actors, especially China, is taking over. So the China has surpassed Germany on I'm not sure either imports or exports, but in last several years. So China as a single biggest trading partner has become very, very relevant for Serbia. And that sends clear signals. So I just think that Serbian leadership and the country, they need to provide some results to their domestic voters. And if they are going to wait for a slow European Union bureaucracy, which comes with many constraints, which comes with different requests, with this concession-based politics, so you have to give me something in return if you want this, it can work, but only if that is mutually beneficial. So what do I mean by that? Chinese offered to invest a lot into building, for example, highways. And if you drive through Serbia and go to the south of Serbia, you can see many signs above the highways which are written in Chinese language. So that means that they're doing marketing and saying that, okay, we built this. And how did they build this? They provided the loan, some good loan, and they provided expertise, they provided companies, they built it, and the highway stays in Serbia. And Serbia, only what they need to do is maybe co-finance this project and to repay this loan over the long term. But it's an investment into infrastructure. On the other hand, you have European Union, which is being reluctant on investing in this region. It has much to offer, but due to some reason, it doesn't offer that much. So that would be my second suggestion, just for the European Union companies, just to try to invest more, or to European Union as such. If there have been some studies that if European Union invests, for example, €1 of public money, then the follow-up investments from private investors will come at €1.1 rate. So it will basically double this investment. This can be a smart approach if just the European Union looks it strategically and recognizes that this region, no matter how different or difficult it is, it's also part of the European continent, and that should be embraced and it should be invested heavily into that.
To be the devil's advocate here, well, the Chinese also built the roof of the canopy of the train station in Novi Sad, which killed a couple of people some years ago and sparked the year-long protest in Serbia. So there are some disadvantages of fast-tracking Chinese companies to do your business.
I wouldn't put blame on Chinese companies here, because these companies are operating on that level that they have a lot of subcontractors, which basically they need to do their job, but they didn't do it and these are usually local firms. So I wouldn't put blame, for example, on Chinese construction company as a main investor or contractor, whatever, because this canopy collapsed. But since this is a very sensitive topic, I'm not going to go into that. We already discussed it in our podcast on protests. But what I will say definitely is that me personally, I took the train ride from Belgrade to Subotica several times, and it was fantastic, to be honest. So it reaches the speed up to 200 kilometers. It's very convenient, it's very comfortable to travel, and these are the benefits that people feel on their skin. So if you reduce your travel time from 5 hours to 2 hours, or 1 hour and 15 minutes, so from Belgrade to Subotica we have 1 hour and 15 minutes, which is insane. I mean, for a country like Serbia, which Serbian citizens tend to think about underdeveloped, you have this project and it's built by Chinese and Russian companies. So some sections are also built by Russian companies, but it's very tangible. But what the European Union offers, it's rhetoric and saying that we are the biggest donor and we provide many investments and so on. Everything sounds nice if you hear it on the TV, but if you go out on the streets and try something, these results are not tangible. So this is also one suggestion, to invest in tangible things, like infrastructure, which is very tangible. And right now, Russia and China, they have pretty good image in Serbia. But I couldn't say the same for the European Union. Because why? There is this logic that Chinese follow up and people buy it, people believe in it, that it's usually they're offering something, they're requesting something in return, of course, but it's usually a business transaction. It's purely economical. It's not like we are going to give you a membership, but you have to renounce part of territory, which is very deeply rooted in Serbian culture and everything.
The European Union has never asked Serbia to give part of its territory to accept Kosovo's autonomy. It stipulates that there needs to be an agreement. It never said what kind. The extra chapter with the negotiations, it's Kosovo issue, and there needs to be solution and agreement. It doesn't say what kind of agreement. It basically says that you need to solve it between yourselves.
Officially and legally speaking, you're right, but
And from the point of view of country which doesn't recognize the independence of Kosovo, this will stay the same from the perspective of Slovakia.
yes, but actually just yesterday I had a conversation with one of Czech colleagues, and Czechia actually accepts Kosovo as independent state, and we were also discussing this topic about EU enlargement, and this lady told me, like, out of 1 hour we spoke, 40 minutes was dedicated if Serbia will accept Kosovo or not, and why not, and why the Hungary is not involved in this process, and I don't know what. So basically the huge part of her analysis or writing, whatever, it's focused on Kosovo. So if you talk with people that accept Kosovo as independent country, they have a different mindset. Probably your Slovakian listeners have the same mindset as Serbs do, because we share the same beliefs. But if you talk with Hungarian, for example, they also see Kosovo as independent country, no matter how good relationship political is with Serbia right now. It's just they take a different position. They don't want to meddle into internal affairs. But that's the case. It is written that some agreement needs to be reached. But then when this country proclaims independence in 2008, majority of the EU countries just rushed immediately and said, yes, we accept this decision. This is very good decision. That's one way to explain it. So legally and technically, yes, you're right. But I think in today's world, and it has always been, the politics are running the show. And who holds the political power, I believe in the theory of realism, who holds the political power can enforce decision on others. And there has been consistent pressure on Serbia to de facto accept Kosovo and de jure, because it's the only possible solution. You cannot normalize relations in any other way. We had an attempt in form of Brussels Agreement in 2013 to create community of Serb municipalities, but look how that turned out. It's a disaster. So 13 years later,
There's
basically nothing happened. So this issue can be resolved only in two ways. One way is for Belgrade to say, okay, you won, we accept it. That will never happen, I assure you. The other thing is the ugly one, and I'm not going to talk about it.
Thank you very much for the debate. And as a final point, I would like to add, look, Europe is not just European Union. We know that one country left European Union, and there are countries such as Switzerland and Norway which are doing just fine without being part of the bloc. And if they offered European Union to join, European Union would jump at the opportunity to accept them. So this is also another way for Serbia. I mean, be the Norway, be the Switzerland of the Balkans, and European Union would kiss your feet to please join us.
Yeah, it sounds like a fairy tale to me, because Serbia is neither rich in oil like Norway or rich in banks and
it's
gold
just a
like
lovely
Switzerland. Yes, and it had quite a few wars more than Switzerland, so it's in a very difficult position. But I appreciate this wishful thinking. It's really nice that somebody is positive about this and optimistic.
Yes, absolutely. I can only be positive since I had such a lovely guest with me today. Thank you, Filip, for joining me and for having a really long and in-depth discussion on enlargement process of the European Union in Western Balkans with focus on Serbia, and I will be very happy to hear from you again next time.
Thank you for the invitation.